one without the other is pointless. And so this is what this book is about. Yeah, it's a homage. It's a lot of homages to my father, to my grandfather, and so on. It's a way of keeping the past alive, as they're not here anymore. Yeah.
Great, thank you. It was a wonderful answer. The next question is to do with inspiration as well. And it's interesting to know because you work in different mediums and different languages, etc. So and it's when you're inspired by something, as you've described, how do you know the form the writing will take with regards to the medium, and also in which language it will actually be written in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, because of my background, I've worked in the media. I've worked as a broadcaster. I've worked as a journalist, I've worked as a translator, as a terminologist, as a broadcaster for the BBC. I've had a sort of very varied career, but the thing that joins everything is the written word, or the spoken word as well. So, sorry, the question is...
Oh, yeah. Just so everybody can hear again as well. When you're inspired by something, how do you know the form of writing with regards to the medium and... So the form with regards to the medium and the language. How will take that from?
It's a very interesting question. It's a very difficult question. The language, I've said something which sounds very nice. Sounds great on paper. Which is Spanish is the language of nostalgia, and English is the language of dissent. Nostalgia because I haven't lived in Spain for many years. I've spent most of my life here, my childhood and part of my adolescence and whatever in Spain. But most of my life is here, and so I think if it is about the past, if it is about something which is very close to my heart, perhaps it might be Spanish. But if I'm going to talk about the day-to-day things, then I think I would resort to English. The problem is that they are not static. Everything is dynamic, everything moves forward, everything influences other things. And so when I write in English, people say, or I say, because I can see it, that there is an element of passion there's an element of slight irrationality, there's an element of slight wanting to change the world, which is not very normal in English. In Spanish, I'm too cerebral. People say, oh, you write like a fonctionnaire, like a civil servant. Yeah, well, I have been a civil servant for many years, I'm sorry. And it's not done just like that, it's not accidental. I like writing in a detached way. Writers, I think Nadine Gordimer has said that it's a monstrous detachment. When you're a writer, you are detached from the reality, you're an observer. Remember that writers have two lives. One, the normal person that you see in front of you, and the other one is the writer. Sometimes the writer wants to live the normal life and it's a disaster because it becomes terribly catastrophic. Tell me about it. Sometimes the person, the normal person, the person you see in front of you, wants to be the writer. And it's terrible because the stories are just chronicles. So you have to, I think Margaret Atwood talks about duplicity. I don't think duplicity is the right word. I would call it duality. There's the two sides of you. They're irreconcilable sometimes. And it's not a psychological problem necessarily, or it might be a psychological problem. I have a psychological problem. It's just the way things are, because you have to live in this world, but at the same time you have to live in the other world, where you can control the situation. In this real world, you can't control a thing, unfortunately.
Thank you. I think it's quite an interesting point of being a writer, as myself a journalist, and I write as well. It's how much of yourself do you put out there as well. You really put yourself out there in all the work that you do. There's probably a point where you have to pull back at some stage to retain your own sanity, as it were. Certainly. But yeah, and the two worlds can certainly merge in what is reality anymore. Regardless of the area you're working in, journalism or short stories. So I can appreciate that. Right, moving to the next question, it's to do with the Friends of Alice website. Of course there is one, and I know that everybody will be looking for it, not now, because your phones are going to be off, at the end of the night. So regarding the website, Friends of Alice, there's a list of aims for the company. If you don't mind, I would like to read out for the benefit of the audience. Some very strongly worded, very inspiring stuff here. So this is what's on the website, something to look forward to when you do go to the website. It mentions to publish pioneering literature, to publish text and translation, to publish authors, bereft, diverse, distinctive and unclassifiable, to serve the most outstanding poetry and prose, to serve a multicultural and multilingual world, to serve the imagination. These are some powerful aims for the company. Why do you think it was important, especially with publishing today, to have these aims in place?
Well, as you know, the world is dominated by a few major publishing houses. They're multinationals. And I think the revival of independent publishers, this is something that's been going on for some years. But this is, for example, my friend and colleague and fellow publisher, Consuelo Rivera Fuentes, she mentioned to me the concept of bibliodiversity, which is something I had in my mind. I didn't know it was called bibliodiversity until she mentioned it. And it is celebrating diversity in the written world, in the publishing world. And I think that is the future. We have to be independent in the sense that we are not moved by selling stuff at maximum profit, but publishing the voice of those who have not been heard for whatever reason, because you find it difficult to publish, because you're a marginal writer, because you're very experimental. There are many reasons why people don't publish. It doesn't make them less of a writer or less of a poet. And so it's really reflecting what the world is, the cultural world is about, despite the fact that we are dominated by these huge enterprises that tell us what we have to think, what we have to buy, what we have to read, what we have to wear, and how we have to behave. So I think it is the time for independent publishers to come forward and promote knowledge. Knowledge is not only about the things that you learned at university or at school. Knowledge is everything. There are people who perhaps cannot express themselves, and there is a knowledge there, knowledge about life, possibly more important than what we're talking about. The Baharak tribe in Congo Brazzaville, you know how they sing? They don't all sing a song, they all sing different songs. And you put them together, they sing their own melody, and you put it together, and that is their song. This is what we have to achieve. Each one of us has his or her own melody. We have to join forces and make music about time. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring. Thank you. It's wonderful to know in this day and age that somebody's taking on, the kind of well-established publishing houses as well, who just kind of have their set agenda and they never seem to really diversify as much as they should do, because there's a lot of extraordinary talent out there that are trying so hard to get out there. You see a lot of repetition in ideas for stories, not even to mention films, repetition. There's so many exceptional writers and artists out there who don't get given a chance because the powers that be catch on to a concept, makes money, and they want to keep doing content till it dies. And even if the original was created, it gets destroyed by commercialization. So it's nice to know there are antidotes out there in our society. Thank you. Right, a few more questions to go before we have the Q&A, then it will be all your turns. So please have those questions burning in your brains. The next question is, you already have some writers who are publishing with Friends of Alice, as you mentioned, who will be doing the poetry readings later. Can you tell me about who they are, how they got on board as well?
Well, thank you. It's all very much in the early stages. So we have three absolutely outstanding poets in alphabetical order: Karim Leo, Anu Sherman, and Michael Wyndham. And they will be reading later some of their poetry, and hopefully we will be able to publish them later on this year. I also have lined up a novel by a friend of mine. I have several short story collections, and of course I've got my endless flow of stuff. So I've got another 10 books in the pipeline, or 12, I don't know. There's some half written, some fully written, and some because I write a lot, and I haven't published for a number of years because I was in a full-time job. I won't go into that subject. So that has delayed things. But anyway, you mentioned something about cinema before. Can I just make a little comment? I'm more of a cinema person than a literature person. I'm sorry to say that, and I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm more into cinema. Cinema for me is the ultimate art. Because it's literature, it's visual, it's got everything. I do little films. I'm not saying you have to go on Instagram immediately and watch them, but I love doing little films, 1-minute films on Instagram. And many of the stories you will probably see are just film scripts. There's a story here in this book, Paradise in Hell, of course, under the section of Hell. And it is a film, it's a film script, it's a description of a bullfight, close up, frame by frame. There are dialogues there that don't have the he said, she said, and so on. It's just the words. There's one called Germs. I won't go into what it is about, but you can imagine. It's called Germs, and that is the words should be enough. You don't have to say she said despairingly, and he replied with great anger and so on. You don't need that. The words should be enough. So sorry, it's just me and my love of cinema. Yeah, I could go on.
Absolutely. I mean, it's fair enough. It all comes from creative places, and you know, behind the film there is some exceptional scriptwriters who are writing those stories as well. You know, so it's all interrelated as is the art. We're coming down to the last kind of two questions, but. Kind of second last one is tonight is the launch. What is next for Friends of Alice?
Lots of things. We have several books lined up. We may appear at the London Book Fair. This is very much in pipeline. We probably will have another launch of the next set of poetry books. There will be 3 or 4 or 5. And hopefully other events, possibility of a prize, possibility of various readings, public readings, and so on. It's all very much in the pipeline. Nothing is defined for now, but these are the plans. Lots of plans, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm sure everybody's really looking forward to seeing the next part of the process. This is the last question before we go over to everybody in the audience. It is a question that is very important, and it is, where can one get the books and find you online? This is your moment, Isabel.
It's about 20 meters away from here. There are some books on sale if you want to buy them, and there's a reduction of several pounds as compared to the price on Amazon. The books are available on Amazon, whether in hard copy or Kindle. Eventually they'll be available in bookstores, independent bookstores, if I may add. Sometimes I include certain stories on the website. For example, on my website, isabeldelrio.com. There are some stories there, so you don't have to pay for them, you just read them, both in English and Spanish. So there is also, we're going to have there's some sheets there with, what do you call it? The... No.
Yes, a mailing list.
Mailing list. If you want to put your names there, then we can keep you informed, and so on, and so on. May I just say that... May I add something? Sorry, it has nothing to do with this. But there are some free merchandising. So there are some postcards, stickers, badges, bags, and so on. If you want to take them on your way out, and the bag is big enough for a book. If you want to have a book as well, that's fine with me.
Great. Well, that's the end of the interview. Thank you very much, Isabel. I think we're going to go. That's a good point. Yeah. It is. Yes, quite right. Okay, so we're going to have a. Apologies. We're actually going to have the second reading. So do keep those questions on lockdown. Yes.
Read another excerpt from the story called Paradise, which is part of this section of the book, which is called Paradise, and you will soon realise what it's about. I don't want to give anything away, as always. Right, so it's written in the first person, which is a great voice, because you can keep everything under control. Yeah. So, we are alone, I say. Never ever, he replies. His is wishful thinking, and I am right as always. This is Paradise 2398. On its last mission, I speak into the mic. But not on its last legs, he cries out. Very much his particular idea of a joke. Yes, this is the very last paradise there will ever be. Me, the captain, and he, the machinist. Yes, he is in charge of machines, a job title I would not have given him, except that he's dressed like one, with an oily cap and a screwdriver hanging from his belt. Timeless, you could say. He saw the picture once in our repository, and he copied the look. He seems to thrive on obsolescence. Paradise. I know he hates the name, because it does not reflect the fact that sometimes it was positively dire on board. We had some excellent times, I replied, to dispel any doubts. Really? I heard the Paradise 1789 was real bliss. That's a legend. No, seriously, it was something quite perfect. No witnesses to confirm such a statement? No, but it's all in the archives, I begin to say, and then keep quiet. I can tell there's no convincing him, appearing as he does to know more than he should. He has this air about him, as if he did not belong anywhere at all. It has been years since it all started, I say, in order to break the silence. More like millennia, soon to end. Without success, most probably. He gets up and removes his oily cap. I have not once seen him without it. Underneath, he has a full head of curly golden hair. Perhaps I want to run my fingers through it. Why all this effort? I mean, it has been the only project we've been involved in throughout our lives. And our parents' lives, and our grandparents' lives, and he mentions interminable generations of humans and their quest, as if he had been part of it. I want to laugh, but I cannot really show him what I feel that clearly. So I cut him short. No need to continue.
So, thank you very much for that, Isabel. Right, so now what we've been discussing is that we're going to hand it over to the audience for questions. We don't have a mic, we have an invisible mic, so you have to use your imagination, and Sheila will hand you the invisible mic. It doesn't actually exist, and you need to pretend that you have the mic. So we're only accepting questions where people actually do that, but shout really loud, okay? That's part of the process. So do please put your hand up and make sure that you can be seen so that you can get your question in. And yeah, so over to you, the audience. Okay, right. Lady in the front there.
First of all, congratulations on your publishing house, which is a wonderful piece of news because you're joining the independent publishers, and with those that mission in your aims, which is wonderful to see and refreshing as well. I just wanted to ask you, you said that experimental writing is about breaking rules and so on, but I think that in order to break the rules, you need to know them in the first place. So it's not just about breaking them for the sake of breaking them, but you need to know them. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like Picasso sort of painting beautifully like Michelangelo when he was young, and then breaking the rules and drawing like a 5-year-old. He said that himself. I'm not saying that. So absolutely, you have to. This is. I have to say it in Spanish because it's a very important word. It's to be a writer is an oficio. It's a job. It's a profession, and because everybody can take a pencil and everybody can take a piece of paper and write, but it's not that. You have to know your tools. You have to know what you're doing. So you have to study. You have to know your grammar, know your vocabulary, read endlessly. Read endlessly. If you want to write, you have to read, and that is what makes a writer. I mean, and you have to bleed. Who was it who said that? Hemingway. He says you sit down in front of the typewriter. In those days, there were typewriters, and you bleed, and that's what it is. You have to be willing to give your soul, your innards, your inside. That's what it is. If you're not prepared to for such a commitment, then you might as well pack your pencils and your bits of paper. But definitely, it is. It is something that is an oficio. I can't say it. There's no direct equivalent of that word. It's a wonderful word. Can anyone think of a perfect translation of oficio? A Spanish contingent? A Spanish-speaking contingent? It's a job.
A craft.
A
Craft is close enough.
Craftswomanship.
Sorry. What is
Okay, great. Are there any more questions from the audience? Please don't be shy. Okay. Right, we'll go with the lady behind over there, please.
Can you remember what your first poem was about and what drove you to write it?
Well, I know that my first word was girl when I was 9 months old. Okay, that wasn't a poem, but it could be. Well, I spoke English before I spoke Spanish. I write since I write. That sounds very silly, but when I learned to write, I started writing little stories and illustrating them. You know, I was 5 or 6 or something like that. The first serious poem I wrote, I was an adolescent. I was very young, and it was. I think my mother was very ill and she died, and it was about that. It was a very tragic, too tragic, but I mean, I was an adolescent. Yeah, I think that was the first serious poem I wrote, facing death at a very early age. No wonder I'm such a dark writer. I'm sorry. It was a very powerful poem. And then I decided that I didn't want to be like that. And I remember taking all the poems, I must have been 16, 17, taking all the poems from that period and going out on the balcony because we didn't have, I was in Spain at the time, we didn't have a garden then, you had a balcony like you have in Spain, or in many countries, and I burnt them. I did this crazy thing of burning them, you know, which you don't do in a balcony in Spain because of the smoke and the fire and everything, but luckily no one from the police or the fire engines or whatever saw me, and I burnt them. So it was sort of cathartic, if you like. I wrote it and then I burnt it, and it made me feel better for a while. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Did it answer?
Yeah. Any other questions? Of course. Sorry.
Yes, it's really very simple. It's like when you will read. I mean, it's like an athlete taking vitamins and eating well
Yeah, exactly.
for doing his sport.
Yeah.
But if you're writing in Spanish, you try and read books in Spanish, and if you're writing in English, you try to read books in English. Or it doesn't matter. It's just what happens in your brain and the nourishment. It doesn't really matter.
Everything nourishes you. I mean, you listen to music, you go to an exhibition, everything is useful, everything can inspire you. And yeah, I don't think there is a sort of, I read Spanish to write in Spanish, or I read English to write in English. I think it's a combination of everything you do and you see, and it's how you process, this is what I said before, how you process the whole thing. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Could I make a comment? I mean,
Of course.
You talked about you have to read in order to write, and it's a craft. And then in your next answer, you say you started writing when you started growing. You know, your first word was a girl, and then when your mother died, you wrote. Now that's not reading. You're actually writing what you learn from life, which in some sense, to me, is something much stronger even than writing from reading. You're actually experiencing life directly, firsthand, and you're finding the words. And you do have this thing that you observe it. You have to be separate yourself a little bit in order to be able to observe it and put it into words. But, so that doesn't quite fit into the idea that it's a craft that you only do from reading. I think the life experiences is a very strong one. Especially you. I thought you described it very well by saying your mother died and you had to write it. You see.
Well, it's what Henry Miller said. You need experience and you need a craft. You need a technique. And so when I was a sort of non-professional writer, like a child or an adolescent, then I had enough with experiences from life. It's only when you think that this is what I'm meant to be here for, and you take it very seriously, and it becomes your love and your profession and your passion, then you have to develop a technique. Some people, I mean, I'm not giving any names or anything, of course, but some people think that you know you just write what you experience, and you don't have to edit the story. Someone told me once that if they edited the story that they wrote, or the poem that they wrote, it will become something else. Of course it becomes something else. There's no such thing, as they say, as writing. It's all about rewriting. So you work on the first draft. Sometimes you don't have to work very much because you're lucky and you get a fantastic first draft. But normally it's about rewriting the whole process. And so I remember I was teaching translation at Westminster University once some years ago, and I told the students that they wanted to be translators, and some of them wanted to be literary translators. And I said, if you want to know your language, you have to read. And one person got up and put his hand up, and he said, "Can you recommend any books?" And I said, "Yes." Where do I start? So, you have to know your craft. This is the definition, it's a craft. You have to know it, and then once you know it, then you can become experimental, and you can start breaking the rules. I've written a story here, in Hell. It's about mindfulness, and it is very experimental because mindfulness is one of the things that we absolutely love, being conscious of the now, and that gets you through life. It helps enormously. And I've written it in a very experimental way. It's actually what's happening in time. Do you call it in time? In the present moment, yes. So as it goes, and this person lives so much in the present moment that she overtakes actually what is happening, and she sees the future. But is she in the future or is she in the past? Because she sees herself, but she's also in the past. So, you know, and I know that story has not been liked by some people who have rejected it when I submitted it to some obscure magazines. But I'm publishing it myself. They don't like it, I like it, so I hope you like it. Yeah. It's called Mindfulness. Yeah.
I just wanted to add that being a journalist and writer myself, it's an immensely personal journey.